All right, so now that we've gotten a handle on how to make our own process from scratch, where we bring in inputs from ecoinvent database, it's just as easy to bring inputs of our own processes as well. We're now going to focus on using ecoinvent processes where we copy them and then modify them to our liking. In particular, I want to focus on how to delink certain inputs from market mix inputs and change it to supplier specific inputs. And this is quite important when you want to specify a specific provider, and that supplier could be, for example, another process that you created or modified from ecoinvent. And so it's pretty straightforward. Um, and generally, it's quite simple when you want to just change the supplier for a specific supplier that's already existing in ecoinvent database, and you don't want to modify that input. Then it's just a matter of changing the provider in that column. But before we go into this, let's talk about market mix inputs in ecoinvent. So it's important to understand that ecoinvent database now, after version 3, has sort of categorized its processes into either ordinary transforming activities or market activities. So ordinary transforming activities are basically activities that are undertaken to basically add value to a product. Well, not just to add value, but to transform inputs into a new output, right? So, for example, a hard coal mine transforms hard coal in the ground to a marketable product to be distributed. So it's just to be considered in the widest possible sense. It could include all these things like extraction, production, transport, consumption, and waste treatment. So pretty self-explanatory. Whereas the market activities or consumption mixes that are found in ecoinvent, you'll basically see in the activity name market for. And anywhere you see that, that means it's a consumption mix. And so the way it works is that it's basically the inputs are a mix of transforming processes um, from various. It could be one or it could be several, along with transport requirements, and it could include some other things as well. So a basic schematic of a market mix activity is that you have several product flows coming in from specific providers of transforming activities. The same product, but it's being produced by different activities, perhaps same technology but a different region or different technologies, and there's transport required going in as a requirement to get the product from the transforming activity from the plant gate to the market for sale for use. And you could include some other things to do with wholesaler or retailer activities, but generally ecoinvent doesn't consider this. They only consider the transport and the market mix of the incoming products from various activities from different regions, for example, or the same region. It's a different technology, but generally it's just a couple of regions considered. And then you have your output being the reference flow of the product X for a consumption mix made up of activity, in this case Y, and activity Z. And then there can also very well be losses in trade, and so there might be some waste flow as well, as a negative input, as you see in openLCA inputs and outputs. Okay, so from there, we can sort of get an idea of what to do when we run into it. So let's go to openLCA and let's just look at some processes in ecoinvent. So I'm just going to go somewhere random. So you can see we have avocado, banana production, and then you have market for avocado, right? Market for palm date, market for papaya. And so these are consumption mixes of transforming processes, and these can be considered transforming processes. So if we look at banana production here, let's look at the market for, and then what we should see as an input for the market for banana is a mix of these processes that are transforming processes. So as we expected, we see we have banana flows coming in, and if we look at the providers, we can see that it's basically a mix from different regions. So here, I believe Colombia, Costa Rica, I guess India, also our rest of world, and so they're all coming in as inputs to make up a total of one. Well, it probably adds up more to one because there's assumed some waste involved. So some of the bananas that are shipped to market don't actually make it for sale, and so the total input is going to be higher than one likely. So it's important to account for those losses. They also have cooling requirements for a certain amount of distance, and then, as I was mentioning, all the transport requirements of getting banana from the farm to the market for sale are accounted for, and these are basically generic transport input requirements for, in this case, transporting bananas globally to a destination. So not necessarily the most accurate when it comes to a specific system that you're developing. Okay, so now that we have a good idea of the difference between a transforming process and a market mixed process in ecoinvent, we realize that the transforming process never has any transport requirements going directly into it. All the transport requirements are going directly into the market mixed processes. So it's good to keep that in mind. So let's now move on to a case study. So we're going to focus on setting up processes in openLCA, again using the ecoinvent database, where our case study is going to be primary steel production. So we're assuming we're doing an EPDs for a vertically integrated steel producer in Alberta, where vertically integrated simply means that they have ownership of the mine, the processing plants, and therefore you can modify the various processes in this value chain with original data from the client and regionalizing inputs where possible. So that's a good thing. We know that we can get a lot of good original data from the client, but we also have to be cognizant of the fact that they're probably not going to provide a lot of inputs that ecoinvent already has. So that's where we try to harness the ability of ecoinvent in terms of its comprehensive coverage of inputs, to sort of narrow the gaps between what we can get from clients and what we can't. So in order to do that, it's quite a good idea to start by copying an ecoinvent process and beginning from there and changing whatever inputs you can get from original sources and move that way. So yeah, they want to know the impacts of their unalloyed primary steel production. So that's going to be basically our functional unit at plant gate. And so we're going to basically go through a portion of the supply chain required to produce unalloyed primary steel production. And we're going to focus on the value chain that the client essentially has control over, where we foresee them having the ability of providing data for these specific processes. All right, so what we're going to do then is we're going to start at the most downstream process in the system, that being steel production converter unalloyed, representing unalloyed primary steel production. So let's turn to openLCA now, and let's get this all closed up and get this closed up. And as you see here, I already did it once, but in class, but now I'm going to do it again. So I'm going to create another folder. I'm going to just call it my steel example. Okay. There we go. So let's just look at what this first process of interest is. I'm going to copy it. Makes it easier to search for it. And I'm going to search for it under processes. And I enter that in. Okay, so here are my options. We have a few options, different regions. And what do you know? We have, oh, sorry, this is the one I created earlier, so we're not going to start with that one. But let's start with the rest of world one. There's not a lot to choose from here in the ecoinvent database, so we're going to start with just this rest of world. And so what I'm going to do is click on it, and I see where it's located, and makes it maybe a little bit easier to find it. And it's called steel production, low alloyed, steel production converter on alloyed. Okay, so we have a steel production converter on alloyed. Okay, so this is the one we want. So I'll right click it, and I'm going to go copy. Then I go up to the folder I just created called my steel example. Right click it, and I go paste. Okay, so now I have it, and I'm going to open it, and I'm going to close some of these things first. Don't save that. Close the test bottle. Close the test bottle. Close the search. Close this. And I'll keep this open for now. This is the original one, and this is the one we just created. It could be a good idea to just write my pro, just as a little signifier to know that you're the one that created it. And now we have a unique identifier for it. So we just completely copied this process. So it's basically identical, except it has a different unique identifier, UUID, universally unique identifier. So this is all information from the original process, and I recommend documenting it. So you can say description from the original process, UUID, right? And then we can add any changes we've made here based on what the client tells us. And we want to specify it for our region now. So let's go to Alberta. Here it is, Canada, Alberta. And let's just erase this. We could always add something else. Let's keep it like this for now. There we go. Okay, so now we look at the inputs, and if we go back to look at the next process of interest where we want to provide a specific supplier, it's pig iron production. So let's look at that input for pig iron. Okay, here it is, pig iron. Now we could, if we just wanted to stop here and simply assume a direct supplier, we could easily do that. This was a process I created earlier, but we want to basically create our own process for it. So what I'm going to do then is look up pig iron from the ecoinvent database, the most representing. So there's only one process, like transforming process for pig iron, and it's just a global, kind of a global average pig iron production process. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to bring it to my folder for this particular project, and I'm going to copy it, paste it, and now we have it here. I'm going to open it, and I'm going to just call it my pro. And likewise, I'm going to take note of the original process that it came from, which was this one. So I'm just going to copy the UID. I'll say original process description, UID. There we go. And now I can add in my changes here. I'm going to put this to Alberta. So I just scroll up to find the right region, and can change this to, for uncertainty purposes, Monte Carlo, simulation purposes, to ecoinvent data quality system. And I'm going to save that process. I'm going to close that original one. Don't need it anymore. This is our process for unalloyed steel production. And now we have the pig iron process, and we can change. This still has the original inputs in original providers. So let's change our provider now. So now I'm delinking it from the market mix that it was using, and I'm going to select our new process, which is this one. This was one I made earlier, but we can see that the name is a little bit different, but I just created this one. So I add it there, and now I have pig iron as input. But now what happens is that we're not accounting for the correct amount of transportation, because the original one assumed a certain amount of transport, right? And we could look that up if we go to the market for pig iron. So the original ecoinvent process assumed a certain amount of transport, and you can see it here. So there was only one source of pig iron from a transforming process coming into it, no losses, and this was a transport mix it assumed, right? But since we're doing a supplier-specific process, we'll need to make our own assumption for the transport requirement as a direct input, right? So what I'm going to do then is add transport, and I'm going to assume the pig iron is transported to the steel mill via train only, so fairly local production, but we're going to change that, right, to make it more reflective of the client's vertically integrated system. So I'll go to transport, and it's land transport, and we want railways, and it's going to be freight rail, and we just need this transport freight. Okay, so we added it, and let's just assume so we have pig iron, it's 0.9 kilograms, let's assume is transported 1,000 kilometers, so it would be 900 kilogram kilometers, or 0.9 ton kilometers, right? And so we can add we can add a description. We can say, assuming train transport for pig iron of 1,000 kilometers. And this may not be exactly accurate, but that's just, I'm just putting this assumption in now for the purpose of the lesson, just to emphasize that when you delink a market mix process, you're no longer accounting for transport, and you need to. So, or yeah, unless of course the input is happening on the same site as the process you're working on. But here we're assuming it's 1,000 kilometers away, so it's going to go via train. Okay, so now the next step is to look at let's just save that first, is to look at let's close the market mix, what input we want to modify to the pig iron process. So if we go back to our value chain of processes of interest, The next one we're looking at is sinter production. So the sinter then goes into pig iron. So if we go back, we can look at the inputs for pig iron based on the default ecoinvent process. We see the sinter iron here. Okay, so we can see that sinter production is here, and there's only one process similar to pig iron. So we're going to have to use this one as our starting point, and I'm going to copy it the same way. I'm going to bring it in here, and I'm going to go paste. Okay, so now we have our sinter. Let's open the original down here, sinter. Just for documentation purposes, we can select the original UUID, and let's open our new process for sinter production that we copied. And again, we can just call it mypro to make it easy to understand that we created it, or flash modify an existing ecoinvent process. Let's keep the original description. Say original description. And then we can write our changes here. Okay, and again, let's change the region. Let's erase this. We can always add more description later. Great. Okay. So let's get this out of the way. Okay, so we created our process. Let's save it first so that it'll be recognized by the other processes. And now we go back to our pig iron, because now we're able to change. We can delink it from the market mix and basically provide the supplier that we just created, which is this one, this transforming process directly coming in. So we have a specific understanding of the transport requirements to get the sinter iron to the pig iron transforming process. Likewise, we could always look up what ecoinvent assumes. So if we go down the market for sinter right here, we'll get an understanding of what they're assuming for the transport requirements. And so they, as you can see, they don't assume transport because it's vertically, it's happening at the same site, and that's probably the same case for our client. It's a vertically integrated system, so we don't really need to worry about that. Then for this, we don't have to change the transport requirement. So now we have, so far now we can see that we have the freedom for these three processes that we just created to change various inputs based on what our client tells us. And there's some clear, not necessarily what our client tells us. It can be based on just knowledge that we should be changing some of these things, because we look at, for example, steel production has electricity requirements from quite a number of sources, right? And if we look a little bit closer, we can see that, let me move this over a little bit, we can see, if we just scroll over it, we can see that there's a bunch of different regions, right? That doesn't really represent the inputs required for our process. New Zealand, RAS, not even sure what that one is. We can look it up though. Russia, this is for ferronickel now, but this doesn't make sense, right? For our process. What we need to do is aggregate this into one. So, for example, let's look at electricity. What we want to do is basically add it up. So what I would do then is open up Excel, and we can. What's nice about openLCA is you can easily copy this into Excel. So I'm just going to copy it, and now we see these are all the electricity inputs, but we only want one. So, but we might not get good information from the client. Maybe this is an example of an input that that they don't give us very good information. However, in practice, this is probably something we'll get in good information for, but let's assume we don't. So the sum of it is 0.021944. So what I would recommend then is go 0.021944. Just to double check, 21944, and so that I just added up what it was all original. Now I can essentially get rid of these ones, remove the selected processes inputs, because we already have the electricity that we want now. We just added it up. And since it's in Alberta, we can assume the grid mix. So let's find a market provider for electricity. So we can simply go to, we're going to assume medium voltage, and yeah, look for Canada. So here's Canada, CEA, and here's Alberta, right there. There. Now we fix the now this is very important, especially for electricity, because grid mix can be very different in terms of technologies, as you know. And we can see another issue, a similar issue with natural gas, high pressure. It's coming from a lot of different sources, right? Well, we only really want Alberta, and hopefully it exists in the ecoinvent database. And what do you know it does right here? So we can change that as well in a similar fashion. So I could update that right now. But what I would do again is select the similar product, the same product inputs, different sources, and simply add it up. We see it's 9.62 e to the negative 4. It might be easier just to go sum and like this, and then copy it, and then put it in the first one. There we go. And then we can get rid of these ones because we have already summed up the total input. And I'm going to go remove selected, and that simplifies things quite a bit. So yeah, that's something important when to think about modifying ecoinvent processes. When you see a lot of the same product input from many different sources, well, in reality, we're creating a supplier-specific value chain, and so we need to basically aggregate that into the specific source. So that looks pretty good then. So let's save it. And we can do, we might have to do the same thing for other processes. We see some doubles here, three same inputs from different source. We'd want to aggregate that and specify the region. Hard coal from very many different sources. That's not very good. Likely all the hard coal is coming from some mines in Alberta, so we want to fix that as well. But let's focus on the main task at hand. But that's something to keep in mind, okay, that you want to fix that. So we have sinter. Now we're interested in the iron ore beneficiation to 65%. Okay, so we can look at our sinter production process that we created, and we see the input iron ore beneficiated to 65%. We're gonna find that if we go to let's close this. Now we're into the mining category, and we're mining metal ores, iron ores, and we can see iron ore beneficiation to 65%. And again, there's only one process, so that's the one that we are going to copy. So let me copy it into our folder for this project. I'm going to go paste, and we should have it now. There it is. Let me open it. Similar process, my pro. Again, good practice to document original description, original process description, UUID, and let's just look it up. Let's just open it up here. Iron ore beneficiation. There we go. And copy that. Close it. Don't need it anymore. and we can write our changes made, and we can inspect. Well, let's change our region, might as well. Canada, Alberta, assuming it's all in Alberta. Go to inputs, and okay, not too many inputs, so that's good. Let's save it. So if we looked at the, yeah, let's close that one. We don't need that one. If we look at our sinter process now, and we looked at our iron ore, let's look at what it was originally assuming for input. And it's assuming the global market mix, right? The only one existing. And there's only one transforming process, so it's not going to be a big difference. But let's just look at what that market mix is assuming for transport inputs. And as you can see, there's quite significant amount of transport requirements to get the beneficiated ore to the sinter production transforming process. So likely the client will also require, similar transport requirements. That's something you'll want to try to figure out. So we'll want to definitely add some transport then, because this is now what we're missing, because we're delinking that, right? We're going to change this to our specific supplier, which we just created right here, iron ore beneficiation, not the MyPro that we just created. And so we'll want to add transport. We can likewise assume it's probably going to be by train again, maybe a combination of train and truck, but likely it's fairly integrated with a train transport system. So I'm going to write a train, transportation, railways, freight rail, and we want that transport freight rail. We don't need freezing or cooling. There we go. So let's add the amount of transport required. Let's just look at, again, what they were assuming. They have a lot of transoceanic, but we're local, so we don't need that. We're just going to look at train. Let's just assume roughly the same amount, because, before the client tells us actually what it is, it's hard to know exact, but let's assume it's about the same, 0.2 ton kilometers. And there we go. We could specify the provider for the transport rail. Let's just see what's available. We have Swiss, China, Europe, rest of the world, US, global. As you see, there's no Canadian, so maybe the best available would be maybe US or rest of the world. Let's just go with rest of the world. It's sort of a default to choose. We can save that. Good. Okay, now let's just take a quick look. Okay, again, we see that there's two sources of the same product, quicklime. Where is this coming from? Rest of the world and Switzerland. So we'd want to fix that, just like the electricity and natural gas. We don't want multiple inputs unless it's actually true. And hopefully the client can shine some light on that. But let's keep it as is for now. Focus on the main task, building out the supply chain. So we've basically created these 4 processes. Now we just need to do one more, and that's iron mine operation. 46% iron concentration in the ore. Okay, so what we're going to do next then is look at, let's close this, we don't need this now. Let's look at our iron ore beneficiation to 65% process, and we see there it is. Right now, assuming the global, we look at the ecoinvent processes for iron ore, crude ore, and we can see that there's only one process likewise for the 65% beneficiation one. So that means we only really have one choice to copy, and that's this transforming process here. So I go copy, I go to my processes, I go paste, and now we have the process for that transforming process of mining iron ore at the mining site, and I can open it up. Let's save this. Let's again, for documentation purposes, let's open this up and copy the UUID. Close it, don't need it anymore. And here's our process we just created. Call it MyPro. Easily recognize it. And we'll say original process description. Add the UID so it's easily recognized. Oh, my battery's running out. Better pause this. Resume. Plugged in, ready to go. All right, back to it. So we created this. Yeah, you can add whatever assumptions you get. Client, again, this is assumed to be happening in Alberta. Maybe it's coming from various sources, and that could be possible, and that would be more interesting. The various transport requirements for a number of mines. But let's just assume there's like one mine, and Alberta. Assume open mining. Why not? Specify this, and let's go to the inputs. So yeah, now we know this is happening at the mine, so it's, there's not much from this. Well, there's obviously inputs from other suppliers for various requirements, but now we see there's these inputs which are basically flows from nature, right? The resources. We need land, and we need transformation of land to a mineral extraction site. Anywhere you see a F with this green, that means it's nature, from nature, or resource extraction, or resource occupation or transformation. Here's our resource ore from the ground. Maybe they have a different number for to produce 1 kilogram of iron ore. Maybe the concentration is different, right? So that's something that you might change, and you might change the associated emissions per kilogram of iron ore produced. What else can we look at? We have medium voltage electricity requirements, but the market's obviously probably not going to be what we want because they're global average process. So let's change it to Alberta. Maybe there's an on-site generator, diesel, or something else of that sort. But for now, let's just assume market electricity. We don't get better data, or it's in fact the truth. Blasting requirements, diesel burned in building machine. Let's see the sources. Surprisingly, there's only one transforming process, so let's keep it like that for now. But again, this is you, and you need to make sort of an expert judgment on how much detail you want to create. We could create our own process and modify it, for example, but you have to pick a point where you feel like it's of high enough quality to generate your EPD. Okay, so we can save this then and go back to the iron ore beneficiation. So we had the iron ore here. It was from the market. Again, we can do a similar thing just to see what ecoinvent assumed for the market mix. This is originally what they were assuming as the input, and again, they're assuming that there's a transport required to get the ore to the beneficiation plant, but not so much. You see, it's an order of magnitude less as to get the beneficiated ore at 65% to the sinter iron plant. So for now, let's make a similar assumption. Let's just say 0.02 ton kilometers. To get the iron ore to the iron ore beneficiation plant, because remember we're changing the market mix process input, the original one, to our one we just created, which is a transforming process, right? It's not a market mix process anymore, so we lost that transport input, so we need to add it. So again, we're gonna go train, and there we go, transportation. Yeah, we're gonna look for the railway. Look for freight, and the freight there. And as we saw, it was 0.019. Let's just assume 0.02 till we get better information from the client. Again, we can assume, we can assume the transport where it's coming from. Let's just assume rest of the world. freight, diesel, yeah. Okay, we can save that now. So, so yeah, now we've created the entire sort of supply chain in a very simplistic way. We can keep building it out and keep making modified ecoinvent processes. Of course, we can also add, original processes from scratch where we have various inputs from our foreground system or from the background system, right? It's totally customizable to your system. So from there, if we want to crunch the numbers, calculate the results, of course, what we're going to do then is first let's close some of this stuff up. Why don't we close it all down for now? And let's look at our processes. So we just created 5 processes that we plan to modify. We've already modified somewhat, but we're going to continue modifying. It's wise to document it somewhere. You can document it. So yeah, let's open the process that we're gonna want to understand the life cycle impacts of, and that's the one most downstream, right? That was the goal of the study, is to understand the impacts of unalloyed steel at production plant, right? So as I was saying with the assumptions, you can document all your changes in a process here, or you can be, as I showed earlier, you can change the description here. Um, you can add something that's very specific about it here, of what your assumption is. And of course, you can use parameters as inputs as well, which can make it a little bit more transparent in terms of why the numbers are the way they are, for your amounts. But yeah, so we kind of basically went through how to delink the market mix processes, create our own process by copying ecoinvent processes and then modifying them. And the main benefit is that ecoinvent has a lot of inputs that are probably not going to be found quickly, or the client just simply won't have that information on hand. So we start from a more generic process in ecoinvent database and modify it as best we can. We also learned about the fact that sometimes the ecoinvent processes have multiple same product inputs from different sources. That's something we want to be somewhat careful about here. It's not so apparent, but for other processes it might be more apparent. We did change some of that, but here's an example of where there's a lot of hard coal input, but we know that our coal is probably coming from quite a local source, whereas here it's coming from many, many different sources. And so, yeah, we have Poland, rest of the world, Russia, China, Australia. So we do want to fix that, because that's just not reflective of our system. And as I showed earlier, what we can simply do is copy all those like processes, open up an Excel, and we can document all this and keep track of it, and then and sum all that up to understand what at least their original assumption is, which was 0.15. Hopefully the client has better information, but for now we can just say, let's assume 0.15 kilograms, and then we can erase all of these, remove all of these other ones, these duplicates, if you will, and we can just change the market mix for this to, let's see what's available. Do we have anything for Canada? So unfortunately, there's not a process in here that represents Canada. So what would be maybe the best process to pick? Well, kind of the default is rest of world, maybe a US process. Maybe, it's kind of regionally closer. For now, let's go rest of world. We could always build out that process if we had information about it, or could find better, information in another database. We could fix it a little bit more. But let's do that for now. Again, these are doubles. We don't want doubles unless the client can tell us that they're actually sourcing their inputs from 2 very different regions in the world. In this case, I think it's probably going to be very generic. It's going to be rest of world market, and I a Swiss market, right? But that's not very reflective of our system, so we'd want to change that as well. But anyway, that's getting into too many details for the scope of this lesson. So like I said, now we're ready. Let's close this one. That's not the one of interest. We're ready to calculate the results, assuming we have all the inputs we want from the client. And so we just create the product system. We have our reference process, refer unit processes, go finish. And the product system will be created. There we go. So if we look at our product systems folder, we see it's right here, converter on alloyed. And now we're ready to calculate results. But that will be held for a later lesson. So that concludes part 2.